You're looking at 222 Brooklyn Avenue, in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn, New York City. On May the 24th of 2023, a two-alarm fire broke out on the premises, collapsing the entire inside of the four-story brownstone, which was built in 1903. The home is the former site of the St. John's Pentecostal Church of Our Lord, which was founded in 1958 and headed by Bishop Devernon Legrand. In this series, we will discuss exactly who Bishop Devernon Legrand was, and how his decades-long presence on the streets of Brooklyn created one of the strangest, underreported, and forgotten cases in American history. This is Devernon Legrand, the Bishop of Crown Heights, the bizarre and murderous case of America's forgotten cult leader. Part 1. A Bishop is Born. June 10th, 1984. 84-year-old Oscar Legrand, of Lumberton, North Carolina, has passed away. His funeral is slated for Saturday, June 15th, inside St. John's Pentecostal Church of Our Lord. The church served not only as a place of prayer, but a residence for numerous Legrand family members. The New York State Department of Corrections would send out a bulletin to the NYPD, stating to be ready for the funeral, due to the possibility of numerous incarcerated family members attending it. There was Oscar Legrand's 60-year-old son, Devernon Legrand, a former bishop and founder of the St. John's Pentecostal Church of Our Lord. Devernon was said to father at least 50 children by dozens of women in his decades-long reign as the head of the church. At the time, he was serving a life sentence at Greenhaven Correctional for multiple homicides, amongst various other charges. Then there was Devernon Legrand's stepson, 27-year-old Stephen Strong, better known as Stephen Legrand, who at the time was also serving a life sentence for multiple homicides at Auburn Correctional Facility. There was also Navatro and Aaron Legrand, two other sons of Devernon, whom were also serving life sentences for murder at that time. These are just some of the examples of the men who were entitled to attend the funeral of Oscar Legrand in Crown Heights, Brooklyn on June 15, 1984. But who was this family? And where did this history of criminality begin? Tuesday, October 27th, 1953. Police arrest 50-year-old Bishop Daniel Davis and 7 others of the New Day Holy Church, located at 159 Albany Avenue in Brooklyn. Recently, police had been investigating groups of women who would arrive at the church on Alabama Avenue in street clothes and emerge from the premises in nun outfits. They would then be transported by vehicle to various city locations where they would collect street donations from the public while posing as nuns. Those arrested with Davis were 27-year-olds Anna Solis and Helen Legrand, 22-year-olds Dolores Bender and Lois Brown, 31-year-old Sarah Maloney, 21-year-old Vasdiner King, and finally, 27-year-old Devernon Legrand, a man who authorities said was responsible for supplying Bishop Davis with the women, and a man who was seen transporting the women around the city. Devernon Legrand's criminal record went back to the 1940s, where he was convicted of assault and attempted abortion, and sentenced to 1 to 2 years in Sing Sing. Legrand was born in North Carolina to parents Oscar and Evangeline Legrand on November the 4th of 1924. As a young man, he would make his way to New York City and begin his lucrative criminal career. It would be in the 1940s that the NYPD would start keeping tabs on Legrand when he was seen driving around a woman by the name of Mother Robinson. Mother Robinson ran a small church in Brooklyn, which seems to be the etymology of Devernon Legrand's ventures into the Holy Nun Scam. The scheme would thrive until her death in 1949. Devernon would then meet Bishop Daniel Davis, a former longshoreman who he convinced to take on the scheme. Daniel Davis would create the New Day Holy Church on Albany Avenue in 1950, and by 1952, nuns operating out of the church were already being arrested for the charity scam. When Bishop Daniel Davis, Devernon Legrand, and 6 nuns were arrested in October of 1953, it would be the beginning of the end for the New Holy Day Church. The church would be disbanded by May of 1954, when Devernon Legrand and 6 nuns were convicted of fraudulently collecting money for charity and soliciting money without a license. Bishop Daniel Davis would not be convicted. He would skate free on any charges, because they couldn't prove his connection to the scheme. During the trial, Rosalie Williams, the church mother at New Day Holy Church, would serve as a witness to expose the scam. She would state that the women would arrive to the church in plain clothes and change into the nun garb. They would then be given solicitation certificates by Bishop Davis and would have to pay up a fee of $2.50 to the church, which was eventually raised to $5. Anything over these fees could be kept by the nuns. Just days after the convictions, Devernon Legrand and 3 convicted nuns, including his wife Helen Legrand, would be arrested once more for the nun scheme. Legrand and his nuns moved the home base of the scheme to over 40 miles away in Wyandanch, Long Island, where they would operate out of the Triumph Church under Bishop Robert Edwards. The group would be sent right back to jail for violating Judge Carmine J. Marasco's orders to cease their soliciting of charities. The case would drag on for a couple of years, in part to Devernon and the nuns' convictions being tossed out due to reasonable doubt. However, a new trial will be ordered by the State Court of Appeals in Albany in January of 1956. By this time, 31-year-old convicted nun Sarah Maloney would die, leaving Devernon Legrand and the 5 nuns, including his wife Helen, to face the music. The nuns would be convicted once more. They would pay fines and serve little time. Devernon Legrand would escape charges, even though law enforcement maintained he was the mastermind, the Svengali leader behind the entire operation. By 1958, Legrand had a new mission. Why continue moving church to church, bishop to bishop, convincing one man after another of your lucrative scheme, when you could start your own house of worship, your own little slice of heaven, a place where only one man needed convincing, and that man had already bought in. His soul sacrificed over a decade prior. Bishop Devernon Legrand was born. He would start his new operation out of 1969 Fulton Street in Brooklyn. Legrand would also acquire the property at 222 Brooklyn Avenue in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. It would be in this beautiful 4-story brownstone that he would establish the church home of the St. John's Pentecostal Church of Our Lord. The property would serve as a home for him, his children, and his devoted nuns. In time, Devernon's family would grow, as would his wealth, power, and influence. The seeds of Mother Robertson had finally sprouted. Devernon was fulfilling his destiny. In July of 1961, Devernon Legrand's wife Helen, who was now known as Sister Eva, and Bernice Williams, known as Sister Elizabeth, would be arrested for assaulting policewoman Claire Falhaber in the Greenwich Village section of Manhattan. The policewoman had approached the two and asked them for credentials to accompany their nun attire. After not being able to convince policewoman Falhaber of their church status, a physical altercation ensued. During the trial in October of 1961, the fraudulent nun scheme was being exposed once more. The scheme at that time was estimated to be defrauding New York residents of $75 to $100 a day per nun who was out on the streets soliciting charities, totaling a believed $250,000 a year for the organization, roughly $2.5 million if adjusted for inflation. At one point during court proceedings, Judge Benjamin Gassman would remove 5 women dressed as nuns and 3 men dressed as bishops, all of whom showed up representing Devernon Legrand's St. John's Church. Judge Gassman would state, "You have no right coming into court dressed as you are now. If you want to come to court, dress in street garb. I will not have a hippodrome here. I won't permit you to influence the jury." In ancient Greece, a hippodrome was a place for chariot races. In modern times, it developed into a place for various shows and performances. From 1905 to 1939, New York City's Hippodrome Theater sat on 6th Avenue in Manhattan's Theater District. It was one of the largest of its time, seating over 5,000 audience members. Judge Benjamin Gassman was not going to have his courtroom serve as a theater for those he viewed as petty swindlers hiding behind the gospel. At this time, the NYPD were starting to develop a clearer picture of exactly who Devernon Legrand was and what was going on in his supposed holy organization. He had accumulated 8 arrests by 1961 and was now claiming to have a Doctor of Psychology of Theology degree from a New Jersey college. He also claimed to be a divine healer, holding keys to hundreds of cures. Legrand was also becoming a formidable real estate investor. St. Joseph's Church organization had now acquired 5 residences that would also be used as houses of worship, 2 being at 1002 and 1007 Sterling Place, which is right around the block from the headquarters on Brooklyn Avenue. The State Attorney General's office would soon produce an affidavit stating that on the premises of the St. John's Pentecostal Church of Our Lord at 222 Brooklyn Avenue, 20 children were found to be residing. The church would say that all 20 children were orphans, with the home serving as the orphanage. However, the affidavit would claim that at least 19 of the children had been fathered by Devernon himself, and his stable of nuns had grown to at least a dozen loyal sisters. Police felt that Bishop Devernon Legrand was not running an orphanage at all, but his own harem. Legrand would tell the court, "I have only 12 children, and they are all from Sister Eva here," referring to his wife Helen. He would also say that even though his sisters wore nun habits, they were sisters of his church, and they didn't have to take chastity vows. Furthermore, any money collected by them was needed to maintain his Brooklyn orphanage. Even more bizarre, the church had developed its own constitution, stating that the members shall do nothing other than serve for the interest of Bishop Devernon Legrand and take care of his family for their natural life. This provision could not be amended. In November of 1961, Helen Legrand and Bernice Williams would be found guilty and sentenced for the assault of policewoman Claire Fallhaber. It would be a year in the slammer for Helen and 6 months for Bernice. Future New York Supreme Court Judge Burton B. Roberts, who was then serving as an assistant district attorney, would predict oncoming financial setbacks for St. John's Pentecostal Church due to the current exposure. He seemingly felt the prosecution did enough damage shedding light on the scheme, so that in time, the whole thing would just dry up and fade away. The nuns were being disrobed, the naked truth revealed before the eyes of New York City. However, the claims of the St. John's Pentecostal Church's pending strife would be nothing more than a display of the state's ignorance, hiding behind a mask of confidence. In reality, the story of Devernon Legrand, the Bishop of Crown Heights, was just getting started. May 22nd, 1962. Bishop Devernon Legrand is inside his residence at 222 Brooklyn Avenue. Loud noises start coming from the home, which at that time shouldn't have been uncommon, considering the home was currently housing an estimated 20 children. Rose Graves, a neighbor at 217 Brooklyn Avenue, starts complaining about the noise. Legrand, in a violent rage, exits his home and proceeds to beat the woman. He would be arrested for the assault, and in court the following year, he would state that he was at home teaching a Bible class at the time and knew nothing of the incident. In July of 1963, Legrand would be found guilty in the beating and sentenced to only 90 days for the crime, even though he had a lengthy criminal record at that time and had already been under the watch of the law. Devernon Legrand would eventually make his way out of jail and return back to the streets of Brooklyn, where his reputation and church family would continue to grow. On any given day, Legrand, who was now approaching 40 years old, could be seen driving around town in his fancy Cadillac, or sometimes being chauffeured around, observing the streets from the back seat of his luxury automobile, the streets where he recruited numerous women into his holy revival. He would wear sharp, expensive suits, don a pencil-thin mustache, and his hair, reportedly a jet black wig. From the looks of it, he could easily be mistaken for a successful musician, or perhaps an actor. But Devernon's lifestyle was no act. He was a thriving businessman. His racket, peddling the gospel of Christ, and what he recently displayed in the beating of his female neighbor, an undying willingness to protect what was his. This is Devernon Legrand, the Bishop of Crown Heights, the bizarre and murderous case of America's forgotten cult leader. Part 1. A Bishop is Born.